Yeah.
All right. Well, Justin, John Van Donk told me I had to talk to you, and I do what John Van Donk says about 70% of the time. So you made the 70% cut. Um, but we've never spoken, and I don't know hardly anything about you except the book link that you sent me. So let's begin with you.
Sure. So this is my studio here in South Pasadena. I've been in the, I'm just getting over COVID, so that's why I sound a little sick.
Oh, congratulations. You've had a very famous disease.
Yes, it's a rite of passage. So yeah, I work in the film business. I'm a camera guy by trade. And then, I adjunct teach in documentary, and I kind of do documentary stuff on the side. I sort of found your channel somehow through Twitter in the middle of 2020, and saw that you were talking about Jordan Peterson, and I was like, wait a minute, I remember that name from somewhere. And when I was going to Fuller Seminary, getting my master's degree in theology and art in around 08 or 09, there was a classmate of mine that mentioned, hey, maybe since you're into story, maybe, you should check this guy out. And it was this kind of like public access channel where he was talking about, children's books and the symbolism in children's books and stuff. And I, oh yeah, that guy's kind of cool or whatever. And I kind of forgot about him. And then I was like, seeing all these incendiary articles about how he was a Nazi and all this stuff. And I was like, wait a minute, is that the same like Kermit voiced professor from 10 years ago? And sure enough, it was the same guy. And then I went and looked, and I thought, wow, like he's all this new content and stuff, So then so because of you, I was sort of reintroduced to him, and
it usually goes the other way around.
Right, exactly. And then Jonathan Pageau, so you it's kind of funny coming into your conversations because it's always halfway through, and you'll say something like you said, oh, let's relevance realization. I was like, what's that? So I have to go and research these things and kind of piece together what all that stuff is.
Oh, poor you.
So then I discovered Pageau, right, because of you, and got his brother's book, and I've been kind of trying to figure out a good way to look at story and symbolism in film, basically, a little bit more sophisticated than they do in Hollywood, just because I sort of teach in that area and I work in that area, and I've always, I have a master's in philosophy, I have a master's in theology and art, and then I have an MFA from Art Center College of Design and Art, so these worlds, I find the theology world and the art and commerce, Hollywood commerce, are separate, right? But everybody's always trying to figure out, what it all means and kind of like what's underneath it. And so in the Hollywood world, it was always Joseph Campbell. It was always this is kind of what it's based on. And when I read Mature Pageau's book, I said, wow, I think that you could maybe go a little deeper than Joseph Campbell when you're talking about story. So my big experiment was to take my little class on documentary that I teach and try to put in some more deeper symbolism or discussion of symbolism anyway, because when you're doing a documentary, you're not making it up. You are taking something that already exists, and then you're trying to find what it means. You're like, why am I watching this? And the really, I've been going to the Sundance Film Festival for about the past 15 years. Every year, we run a dialogical program called the Windrider Forum that puts people of faith in conversations with filmmakers. And I noticed over and over that the documentaries were really, really pregnant with meaning. And I just, and most people said, I don't know why I like that documentary so much. A lot of people like, there's no formula for it, like you have with the Joseph Campbell stuff in the fiction world. So
right.
My big experiment is to try to take some of that symbolism stuff from over here, and then kind of see how it works by taking someone who's a filmmaker who wants to make a little documentary and introducing some of that to them to see what happens.
Huh.
And so far it's been pretty fascinating because my main goal in my little class is just for them to get to some deeper meaning somehow.
Yeah.
But using the lens, using the housing of that particular art form to try to do it. And so I feel like I'm kind of like venturing out into uncharted territory here. And, I just would like to have some dialogue partners, who could maybe at least understand some of what I'm trying to do. So I think that your estuary network, is something that, I've talked to John about as a potential fertile ground for, bouncing some of those ideas around.
Yeah. Yeah. You'll find a lot of takers. You'll find a lot of takers. And sometimes what I do with these conversations, a few months ago, we started an art group basically because someone came on and said, I want to start an art group. And I said, well, if you give me some contact information that people can watch this video and contact you, you'll get people. And and fortunately the channel isn't too large, so you won't get too many people, because you really want sort of somewhere between 5 and 20. That's about the right size. You get less than 5 and it feels like, you get more than 20 and you're just swamped, and it'll whittle down from there. But well, that's a very interesting little story you just told me. I've never thought about documentary filmmaking because I've not made films except these crazy things I'm doing in my office, if you can call them films. But I guess I had never thought of helping people develop a symbolic sensitivity in the context of documentary filmmaking, because of course, I would imagine anyone who goes about deciding to make a documentary film sees a situation, a context, and in a sense sees the story inside of it, at least has an inkling of it. And then in the process of then creating the documentary film, you are telling the story. And as you know, the last series of videos that I've been putting out recently, I've been paying more attention to story, because basically Peugeot, and I decided, because I've done so much with Peugeot, I wanted to use someone who was a little bit further outside of the Christian framework. So I've been using this YouTuber, the Critical Drinker, whose videos very few people would very few people would imagine that he's doing anything Christian with what he's doing, which is why I picked him. Yet there is something sort of like in Jordan Peterson's meaning method, there is something to him about storytelling, that our sense of good story is in a sense a little remnant of truth. I don't want to use the word sacrament because that's placing it as a little high, but it's a window into truth in a thoroughly secular world. And that's I think why people are devoted to film as art, watching documentaries, and even movies that they might not be thinking of them as artistic at all. It's what's drawing us, that we have a sense that story, that there's something sacred about story when it works. And so then I would imagine, especially with documentary filmmaking, they're seeing the story through whatever it is they found that has grabbed them. Says, oh, I want to use these people and these events to that they're in a sense doing something of a preacher's job, pulling it out of, if the events and the people are the text, pulling it out of the text and placing it before them, let's say. Is that
Right.
fair?
Yeah. Yeah. There's so many parallels between, I think, the process of going and trying to find a story out of whatever you see in front of you and the preaching instinct. Here's an example. See what you think of this. So you think of a testimony, right?
Yep.
Testimony, because the stories that you tell, you have to choose which one you're going to tell and what the structure it's going to be. The structure of a testimony. Okay. So if you're thinking of the world in fractally, right, you can have a big testimony. You might say the gospel is a big testimony, but you can also have little ones, right? And so a testimony structure is just us going from a state of blindness or lostness, and then a little miracle happens, and then you end up in a state of seeing or being found, right? So it's, I was lost, but now I was found. I was blind, but now I see, right? So I found that a lot of these documentaries have the testimonial structure. So it's like there's a film called Life Animated, which is about a boy who can't speak. I don't know if you've seen it. And he's on the autism spectrum, so he can't speak because the world is coming at him too fast. So he watches these Disney animated movies like, Aladdin and Little Mermaid. And because of the simplistic nature of the animation, which causes him to be able to see emotions more exaggerated, and the predictability of the dialogue, the parents found that if they said a line of dialogue, he would say the next line of dialogue. They thought he couldn't speak, right? And so through these movies, by the end of the documentary, he's learned to talk. He's learned to almost function as an adult, and he's giving a speech in Paris about the power of animated films for autism, helping people with autism. So that has that testimonial structure, right? It starts out with no hope, and then a little miracle comes in, and then there's hope, right? And so you could think of it, if you could say, well, I'm the kind of person who looks for testimonies, testimonial stories. I express myself through the testimonial pattern, right? And that's one example, right? So that you could sort of take, you're choosing what you're going to focus on. You're choosing what you're going to tell, because the testimonial structure, we have a need for that. It does something to us. It says something about how, we live in a world where miracles can happen, where something outside of your frame of what you think is possible can break into your frame, right?
Have you discovered John Vervaeke's work in all of this? Because that's the relevance realization, that's the frame, that's the cog sci that is in this little corner of the internet. I know there's a lot of homework to do to we're 4 years into this thing, and I appreciate the fact that if someone dips in now, it's like, whoa, because what you just laid out there is very much part of so there's Peterson and Pageau and myself and Vervaeke, and then there's lots more smaller channels around. And so, what you laid out is very germane to the kinds of things that we're doing.
Yeah, I made it through at least watching his Awakening from the Meaning Crisis. I don't know if I understood all of the terms, all the Greek terms and all that. He really, really requires a lot of homework. But yes, I think that kind of thinking, which is looking for patterns.
Yep. That's
what I'm trying to apply just to my area,
Okay. Now I've broken pattern a little bit, and I want to, part of what I always do with these conversations is first, and we haven't done that yet, I want to contextualize you, because what I know is that if people don't have a sense for you as a person, they're probably the likelihood of them being able to engage you well and everything else you say is going to be lower. So tell me about who raised you, and did you go to church, and how you wound up teaching and accumulating all these degrees?
Yeah. So my dad was a pastor.
Oh,
So I was, one thing when your dad's a pastor, you have a lot of conversations around the dinner table about deep things. It
that's
was
not always true.
well,
It
maybe.
was in your house.
Well, it wasn't my case. Yeah.
Okay.
Um, and yeah, so it was an evangelical church growing
Okay.
up. When I went to college, after college, I kind of gravitated a little bit more towards the Reformed, and I ended up studying at Fuller for one of my master's degrees because I just wanted to understand a little deeper about theology and art, about art and what was underneath it. And Richard Mao was the president at the time, and I found out that I could petition, even though I wasn't getting a PhD, I could petition to get into the PhD courses. And so that's the most fun I had, because it's just a few grad students around a table talking about Dante's Divine Comedy, or, so I took a couple of those from Mao. And so the Dutch Calvinist influences from there,
Mhm.
and now I go to a PCA church in Pasadena here, which is a Tim Keller plant.
Yep.
Plant. And there's a lot of, other film type people and musicians and artists and stuff in my church. So it's kind of a hub for that kind of stuff.
Tell me when you first decided film was something you wanted to give attention to.
Well, I was into photography when I was in high school.
Mhm.
I grew up in Mammoth, which is a beautiful area, in the mountains.
Oh yeah.
And so I was doing a class at night at the local junior college in fine art photography, and I really got into it. So when I went to college, they had a communications major, and that's what my major was, but they did have a film emphasis. And I started to, as I took more of those classes, the more I got into film, and then ended up basically sneaking onto a movie set up in Mammoth when they were shooting one of the Star Trek films, and met someone there that got me my first job at my next movie, and kind of went from there. Joining
So,
the circus, it's almost like.
so how long did you work in the film industry then?
Since 2000. Yeah.
Oh, so you're still in it.
Yeah. I'm a camera guy. Yeah.
Okay. And so you collected these degrees while you were doing that too? You're not that old.
I was just bored at night. My first job was at Panavision, which is a camera place, and it was a 9 to 5. It was a corporate job, and I was just out of undergrad, and I just was feeling I needed a little bit more intellectual stimulation. So I started going to UCLA Extension at night, taking philosophy classes. And then one of the professors said, "Hey, you have probably enough prereqs to get a master's." And he goes, "I teach at Cal State Long Beach. You could get a master's easy." And I was like, "Yeah, I'll do that." So I got a master's there, but it was kind of weird because analytic philosophy is not as exciting as you would think in terms of knowing about the meaning of life, and they avoid all that in analytic philosophy.
Oh, I really don't think analytic philosophy is very exciting. You just I know enough to think I don't think I'd want to do that at all.
Exactly. And that's how it was for everybody in my program. It was just like, we were like, I thought we were going to be talking about cool things, not like, modal logic and stuff, And so not that modal logic isn't cool, but it was maybe above my head, And so then I was like, well, I'll finish, I wrote my master's degree on the meaning of life, really kind of like how people were talking about the meaning of life at the time, which was Thomas Nagel was kind of updating Albert Camus on the notion of the absurd. And basically I had to spend the whole time arguing why, and this is so funny looking back on it now, but I had to argue why it was appropriate as a category in serious philosophy to talk about the meaning of life. Because the sentiment was that it's a category mistake. A sign can have meaning, but how can a life have meaning? And so I spent the whole time just basically arguing that it is a appropriate thing to talk about in philosophy, and that's as far as I could get.
Wow.
Because of the culture at the time. So when I went to Fuller, I met some friends that were going to Fuller, and the conversations they were having were way better. It was like, okay, now you're actually allowed to talk about things that are interesting. It was as if like in doing philosophy was like, when you're doing climbing a rock, and they'll try to make it harder. They're like, you can't use this handhold and you can't use that handhold. That's what it was like. You can't talk about this. You can't talk about that. And so doing theology was actually more philosophy in a way than I was allowed to do at Cal State Long Beach. So that's how I ended up at Fuller. And then when I finished my master's degree there, I realized in order for me to ever teach, I would have to have a terminal degree. And in order to do that, I would either have to have a PhD, in which case I'd be teaching academic stuff, or if I got an MFA, then I could teach, something fun, like I do now, like documentary. So I went and got my MFA at Art Center, which is here in Pasadena, very close. And they let me work the whole time. So I could continue working on commercials while I was getting this master's degree. And that's when I really fell in love with documentary. As something that is way more deep and interesting than I thought, and it's only getting better now. Like the depth and quality of the documentaries that are coming out now is amazing, I think.
Yeah. Well, just from the seats I sit in, they're showing up more and more on Netflix and HBO Max, and they're getting higher and higher visibility in places that, generally speaking, only, movies, fictional stories would have gotten. So it's clear that they are rising in status in the culture. Why is there a class of documentary at Fuller?
Oh, no, I teach at Biola.
My
class that I teach is at Biola. Yeah.
So you're part of the art department?
The film department. Biola has really stepped it up. They're trying to pull a Chapman, where Chapman University became a top 10 film school in the world about maybe 15 years ago, by just taking a bunch of professors from AFI and stuff like that. Biola is, I think, in the top 25 now of film schools in the world, on the the variety list or whatever, and they're trying to move up. And so they're investing a lot of money, and they're starting a master's program. And so it's really, a high quality film program now.
That's interesting. So they're trying to make Christian movies be less bad.
There's always been a conversation about, there's always been a tension, you might say, between, what the purpose of a movie is, or even any work of art. In an evangelical context, it's often put as subservient to evangelism. So it's like it's valuable insofar as it is a megaphone for an evangelical message. But I think that pretty much the generation that I was a part of, the film program that started at Fuller, which was called Real Spirituality, which I still write reviews for them, was kind of looking at it in a more holistic way and trying to have a more robust theological understanding, which I think Mao brought over from Calvin, which is Kuyperian, Kuyperian and Herman Bavinck, kind of understanding of the arts. And that has now kind of permeated, I think, almost everyone that's a Christian in the business, I would say, is a much more robust. Now, there's certain niches of Christian films, but that's a marketing category.
Yeah.
That if you talk about Christians in the business, you talk about Scott Derrickson and Destin Daniel Craig and Lee Isaac Chung. These people are directing Marvel movies, So that's kind of like the Biola and Fuller tract of people that are coming out of those two programs are doing more mainstream movies. You wouldn't necessarily know that Destin Daniel Craig is a Christian filmmaker when you watch what's the latest Marvel movie, Shang-Chi.
Okay.
If you watch that, you're not going to go, oh, this is a Christian film, but
okay,
it is a Christian filmmaker. Or when you watch Doctor Strange, that's a Biola graduate. That's Scott Derrickson. So these are the kind of people. And then of course, Mako Fujimura, the fine artist, he's the kind of patron saint, I would say, of the Christian artist. And he wrote Culture Care, Culture Care, not Culture War, that you generate good in the world through creativity, not necessarily by arguing with people, So I think that's kind of the new emerging view of how Christians interact with the arts now.
Well, that's encouraging to hear. So that does in many ways parallel my estuary project, in that I think there are well, the project is so small that very few people have designs upon it, but the continual emphasis I get from people is, well, this is estuary is an evangelism program, and like you say, to sort of become a megaphone for preaching at people. And that's basically the first rule of estuary, is that we're not going to do that. In fact, when I started my meetup, I had to really work hard at not praying before or after meetings, because it would kind of scare off the people. So I remember when I was in college, working my way through college, I worked in a lumber yard, and I went out to I was on a run delivering something with one guy, and I sat down to lunch with him, and I just, all my life, I closed my eyes and I started praying silently in the restaurant. The guy across, "What you doing?" I'm in New Jersey. "So what you doing?" He says, "I'm praying." "Well, don't do that again." It just unnerved him that I closed my eyes. So, yeah. So in terms of estuary, the focus has been facilitating meaningful conversation, and not necessarily demanding a specific destination for the project or the people, but having, a degree of trust that truth actually exists, and it has truth, beauty, and goodness will appear, and will give guidance to those who seek. So why do you want to talk to me? What are you looking for?
Well, I don't know. I think that the little corner of the internet that you have is very fascinating, and I think it relates a lot to sort of what I'm about. And I don't know exactly how I might wind up being involved, but I think that there's a lot of overlap. And so, like I was saying to John, I don't know if I could lead an estuary group given my schedule, because when I work on a TV show or a movie or whatever commercial, I can't say I'm going to be free every Tuesday afternoon or something like that.
Sure.
But I've learned not to let that stop me in terms of getting.
Apparently, you had all these degrees while you're working.
Because otherwise you'll just, I'll just be working on set all the time, and I won't develop. And I think it's a kind of it's just a play. I'm trying to find ways to have better conversations, more substantive conversations. I really kind of feel jealous of the Inklings having a pub that they could talk about their novels, and they were all, like, there's just so few places left in our culture now that is designed around conversation.
Yeah.
It's mostly designed around entertainment. Like, we're going to go bowling, or we're going to go to Disneyland, or we're going to watch this movie, or we're going to this, but like actual conversation, even if you go to a pub, the music's going to be too loud for you to talk sometimes. So I think that there's a sense that you can plant seeds, and you don't know exactly what they're going to grow up into. You don't know exactly what that's going to look like, but you can still make space in your garden for something to grow, And so in terms of me, maybe I'll be able to go to some of John's estuary meetings. Maybe there will be one closer to me at some point here near Pasadena. You know, maybe maybe there'll be somebody that wants to hear me try to bounce off how to apply this symbolic stuff to movies. You know, maybe somebody would be interested in more dialogue about that. You know, it's just I think there's probably a lot of people out there that are similar to me in terms of the conversations that they'd like to have. Where and how you have those conversations, I'm not sure, but I think that's kind of what you're doing. That's what you're.
Well, there's a number of things that I think we can do. One of the things that I've learned, I mean, it's so funny because I never started out thinking I was going to do this. I've always been frustrated that ideally I would love, I should really think about what I'm going to say before I say it. People regularly will knock on my door in this little corner of Sacramento after they have burned through their relationships with family and friends and anybody who will give them any help, because they see a church and they think, well, at least there's some chance if I go to a church and I ask for money or help, someone will do something for me. That says something about the reputation of churches that continues to persist in our culture. I don't think anybody looking for a significant life-changing conversation would look at a church in the same way. And I'd love to see that change. And that's part of why I talk about estuary and want to see this thing grow. Now, part of what I've learned over the last 4 years is, in many ways, you have to grow this thing yourself. And I don't mean you in particular, but I mean, part of the idea of an estuary is that, you know, you have this here in California, you have this water coming down from the mountains and it's going to go to the Pacific. But, you know, sometimes it gets into a beach. And so, you know, something digs out, and over time you have this buffer and you need it open to the ocean because the water's got to get out. But you also like it open to the ocean so that the fish can get in, and that the interchange here will be productive and interesting. And that is in fact what has happened over the last 4 years. Now, the internet is in many ways a rather natural estuary builder, because part of what happened fairly early on with such an open platform is that people with peculiar ideas and interests began to find each other, and that has obviously continued, and it's continued to change just about everything in our world. So I suspect that, similar to, let's say, what's happened with a bunch of the other groups that have sort of formed around my work, is quite a bit of what you're looking for. And so, you know, we can facilitate some things, like I can talk to the powers that be on the Bridges of Meaning Discord server and carve out a little section or create a little Discord server for your type of niche. And I think probably something can develop. I know it's happened for Sherry. A number of people, Nate up in Washington is pretty much growing his own estuary. In fact, maybe even a system of estuaries. It's happened a lot. So I think I've over the last few years talked to, not a lot, but a few people in film and more people that have to do with story. And I think the documentary angle will be of even more interest because, you know, there's one guy who a few weeks ago basically made a video and says, I want to do a documentary about this little corner of the internet. And I said, okay, but he lives in Wisconsin and has, you know, zero understanding of any of this, but hey, he's got a vision and a will to pursue it. So we'll see what happens. Yeah. So yeah. Yeah. how would you like to proceed with something like this? I mean, obviously Vendonk's thing is kind of Vendonk's thing. And part of what happens with estuaries is that they very much take on the character and the unique characteristics of basically whatever stream's flowing to the ocean. And so I could see that would be very true with you too.
Yeah. Well, I have no idea how to use Discord, so I don't know. I don't even really know what it is.
Okay. Well, I didn't
maybe-
either. And it's not too user friendly, but it's not too hard. I'll
Yeah.
get you the invite to the group. Some of my videos lately, see, so this whole thing started again because when Jordan Peterson came through, I immediately saw by reading comments, subreddits, I immediately saw there is a real demand for people to, Jordan Peterson was just exercising people in some ways from some cultural spirits. And there was a real desire and need for people to talk about this. So I started a local Jordan Peterson meetup. When I made my videos, I immediately had people contacting me wanting to talk about things. As a pastor, I knew if they were going to make progress in any dimensionality, they needed to talk. I could only give them so much conversation because there's one of me and many of them. So as a pastor, I knew, well, I need to create little communities all around me, because they may get a chance to talk to me every now and then, but they need to form relationships with each other. And it's actually those relationships and the conversations with those relationships where all of the good stuff will develop. The relationships, the ideas, the thoughts, the insights, all that stuff develops in that way. And so over time, I've basically been catalyzing the formation of such groups. And sometimes they're a little Discord community, sometimes they're a YouTube channel, sometimes they're a group of people who meet physically, and it's been multidimensional in that sense. And Discord is it's a platform that allows people who game online to interact with each other in real time. But it's also a message board. And you can also use it like Zoom or Skype or how many other things. It's extremely flexible. And so, and it costs nothing to start a Discord server. And so it was something that I knew, I didn't even have this idea. It was the guys in my local meetup says, we should start a Discord server. And then the thing just grew. So I think we can, I can certainly talk to Joey and we can play with this, but I will send you a link to get on there and start looking around. But the way it's been useful for me lately is that every now and then at the end of the day, I'll have an hour or two that I can devote to it. And so I'll just hop in the Discord server and very quickly find conversation partners. And because you've created a community with a degree of knowledge, now suddenly we don't have to explain or define all of our terms. The conversations in that sense can get going. And by using Discord, by using YouTube, others use Voxer, all kinds of other technologies, the conversations in these communities have continued to develop. And what has happened now in this little corner of the internet is that there's been a meta process whereby there are all these different levels of status in the estuary. And so it's really been quite a dynamic creation of creative potential. And it sounds to me like that's really what you're looking for.
Yeah. I'm kind of jealous of the, I remember a pastor I had once that he would do these Sunday school classes in the morning, and he would pick a topic and he'd go through the topic. And then by the end of the topic, he would write a book. And then he'd pick the next topic and he'd go through the topic. And that's what I find the best way for me to figure out an idea is the oral tradition. The more you explain it, the more you understand it. And then you can actually put out some content that is helpful for people. I need to know where people trip up on what I'm thinking, you know, or like, wait, I don't understand that part or this part, you know. That's why I find teaching is a lot of fun. It's a very, very small part of my career, but it's a lot of fun to kind of go through that, and finding more contexts for that to happen organically, you know, would be great, I think.
Okay. Well, if we can do that, that's not hard. I'll just, so any of y'all listening to this, if you heard this guy and you said, oh, I'd like to talk to him and I'd like to be part of a group and I'd like to, you know, put something in the comment section under this video, and you'll have to, you know, or, you know, contact me on the Discord or Twitter or my email, and I can ship things your way. And note, because that, in fact, especially for Sherry Harkin, she was the art person who came to me and said, I want to start an art group. And I said, all right, anybody want to be in an art group? And it's actually been, I've now having successive conversations with the people who are working in it. And it's really become for them a vital creative source of all the, because they were often people working in isolation. And so often, if you don't have, like you said, it's really hard to have people around you that are able to do this. And it winds up being actually fairly flexible so that it can fit into your schedule and their schedule. So I see what you're looking for, and it can be had, and I can help you.
Okay.
So that's a good thing. That's a good thing.
Great. Yeah. Well, cool. Well, yeah, I appreciate you taking the time. I know you're having conversations all the time. I can't believe your work ethic. So appreciate you taking the time out to talk to me.
Well, fortunately, a pastor's job is extremely broad. And if I see an angle at which I am in one way or another working in God's kingdom with one person or another, we devote our time to that and see what fruit comes. And in the last 4 years, I've seen a tremendous amount of fruit with being generous with my time. And so seems like a good thing.
Yeah, definitely. Yep.
Well, Justin, so again, anybody who's watched this and listened a little bit to the documentary nature of this, and if you're curious and if you'd like to be involved in a kind of group or in figuring out how a group could form, leave a comment, let me know. And, you know, Vendonk, I mean, this is how we got the whole estuary thing going too with Vendonk. So we'll give it a shot.
Yeah. Maybe another way is just go to my Instagram, Justin's Morning Coffee. I take a picture of my coffee every morning, and they could contact me that way. That might be an easy way to do it.
Oh, that's perfect. Send me a link to that.
Okay.
Instagram isn't one of the platforms that I'm majoring in. So send me that link and I can include that below. And I can think of a couple artists right away that will probably jump on this. So
yeah. Okay. Perfect.
Well, thank you, Justin.
Yeah. Thank you.
This was good. And we will see what comes. I'm excited.
Okay.
All right. Take care.
Bye.
Bye-bye.